One of the interesting issues with Mars is trying to prevent contamination. You see, there's two types of contamination that we want to prevent from the surface of Mars. We want to prevent Earth contamination going to Mars, and we want to prevent Martian contamination going to Earth. The reason being, if there's anything biological of origin, we don't want that to be mixed around with everything else. So we want to have a nice clean report, and that's one way that we can do that, to try to keep this contamination between the two to a minimum. The way that this is typically done on Earth, if you have something that you want to prevent the contamination, then you have that substance in a higher pressure than everything that is around it. And that way, any contamination will go in that particular direction. For instance, the Apollo astronauts, when they came home from the moon, they were put into a chamber that was lower pressure. That way, if there was anything that was a contaminant from what they had, it would go into the chamber and not out of the chamber. And that would prevent any theoretical moon bugs, bacteria or whatever, from escaping out of the chamber. And that's the way they prevent it. Now, with the moon rocks, they actually put them in a positive pressure environment. So that way, if there's any kind of contamination, it's going to go outward. And therefore, you will not lose any of the pressure, the seal. You won't get like bacteria or stuff that's going in. You'll be able to keep the rocks as pristine as you can. It's a challenge to make that work, but it's what they work towards doing. With Mars, you got things a little bit differently. Because you want to have this contamination two ways prevented, then there's a lot of things you have to do. First of all, they're talking about putting the spacesuits on the outside of the spacecraft. And so that way they don't get the dust and other things on the inside as they would otherwise. While that was an interesting part of the spaceship design that they showed when they were showing off these new spacesuits, one of the things that caught some interest, including even people like Scott Manley, is the helmets have two layers. Unlike Mark Watney's helmet, which had just a single layer, and when it was cracked when he was on Mars in The Martian, then it started leaking out atmosphere and caused some pretty serious issues. This one had two. Now, there's a couple of reasons why this could be. This could be for that exact Mark Watney situation to provide redundancy, but there's probably better ways to do that, and they wouldn't space it out so much. They could have the two layers closer. This could be used to prevent micrometeor impact damage. So the outer shell could be thinner and the inner one thicker. And then if you had something that hit the outer shell, then it would tend to go into a bunch of tiny pieces, impact the bigger shell, and not penetrate at all. And that one is a possibility. But when I attended the Humans to Mars Summit, I learned about something as another possibility that could be there. Something really intriguing. And that is, you're trying to prevent contamination from both directions. So what you would want to do is to have a middle layer between Mars and the human-rated layer that is a little bit higher pressure than both. And so that way, if there's anything that will contaminate, it's going to come from this inner middle layer that will contaminate either Mars or the surface. And this inner layer you could keep potentially completely contaminant free. And if you can do that, then you will prevent the contamination from both directions. It's a pretty neat idea, and that's probably what they're going for, I think. The helmet was just one issue. They probably has the suit designed in a lot of different ways to try to keep that from being the case. Hopefully this will work and the design will work. It seems like these new suits are a lot more flexible and can offer some pretty neat other advantages as well. But that's just one little thing that I thought was quite curious. Now, it's going to be extraordinarily difficult to keep Mars pristine, and we don't really try to keep it completely pristine. Martian spacecraft these days are built inside of a clean room, but they're not built to the biological standards that the early Viking missions were, because we've determined that Earth life is not very likely to survive very long on Mars, and quite frankly, little bits of Earth have actually hit Mars, so there's some amount of contamination that's already happened. But happening in the massive amounts of levels that a human presence would be could be detrimental, especially if you're trying to study Mars and determine if there is some kind of biological life. Anything that is trying to determine if there is life has been sterilized. That's part of why Viking was so carefully sterilized. The robotic arm on Phoenix was also similarly sterilized to try to keep it safe, and it was in its own little protected bubble that was only released once they got to Mars. Hopefully, though, we'll get something interesting. And anyways, I just thought this was a little interesting anecdote about the spacesuit design and something I thought you guys would like to know. Let me know if you have any questions or comments. Thank you guys for everything. You guys are awesome. And until next time, keep on tracking. Take care.